So the FIR data principles emphasize the findability, accessibility, interoperability, and the reusability of data. Last week, we were talking about findability, how to make data findable. So the three things that you should remember from that is that you should provide a persistent identifier, for example, a DOI or a handle to your data, describe your data with rich metadata, and allocate your data in a searchable resource, for example, a repository. In today's webinar, we focus on the letter A, accessible. What does it mean? So the principle accessible says that the metadata and data are retrievable by their identifier using a standardized communication protocol. The protocol is open, free, and universally implementable. The protocol allows for an authentication and authorization procedure when necessary, and the metadata are accessible even when the data are no longer available. This time, the principles seem to be more technical, and indeed, some of them are formulated a bit more for repositories than for researchers. But there are things that you can do to make your data more accessible. For example, give access to your data and provide metadata. That's why we will look at it today. First of all, what is metadata? So metadata is data about data. It's like independent data that contains structured information about other data or resources and their characteristics. Metadata can be added manually or automatically. And from the FIR perspective, metadata is even more crucial than the data itself, since metadata can be freely available even when the data is not. And remember, the FIR principles emphasize not only the human readability or reusability, but as well the machine readability. So while the documentation is made to be understood by humans, as it like longer text that you have to read, the metadata are intended primarily for the machines. Here we see different categories of metadata. So we have, for example, the content metadata, like title, description, the author, the license details, so all the information that are crucial for citation of data. Then we have the administrative metadata that gives more context about the project you're working on. The technical metadata that are added mostly automatically when we use different devices like the recording date or focal length, etc. And then we have the structural metadata that gives more insights about the units, collection methods, sample size, or different other things. So I think I will not say more about metadata at this place, because I do think you will understand it a little bit better when you see it, when Nick gives you a demonstration, or when Emma tells you how she uses metadata. Another important topic would be metadata standards, but we will talk about it next week in the webinar to interoperability. So now I would prefer to go to the ivory tower of science, where the scientists are not willing to share the data, are not willing to give access to the data. There's the question, is it a scene from the past? And I really hope so. What does it mean to give access to data? So you can give open, restricted, or closed access to data. And giving access to data is needed to regulate, of course, who can use your data and under which conditions. So it can be necessary to restrict the access if you work with personal or sensitive data, or data that contains copyrighted material. Then you are obligated to make sure that only the project members can access the data. And remember that regulating the access doesn't mean you have to open your data completely, but as an open science advocate, as you heard before, I really want to show you the benefits of open data. So it is important to open your data because it builds public confidence in the processes and the results of research. The research data can have important implications for public policy. The research data can affect private interests, and opening up the research data contributes to academic integrity. So how we do it with authentication and authorization, which provides the privacy, integrity, and availability of the data. So there are different ways to, different methods to give the authentication and authorization to your data. The login credentials include passwords, personal identification numbers, biometric scans, security tokens, or even other authentication factors. So even before collecting data, it is necessary to understand who is going to get the access to your data, under what conditions, under what permissions, and how you will document it. And I really recommend to you to log all the data access during the research project, especially if you work with personal or sensitive data, so you always can see who accessed what data and when. And the last very important part is make your metadata accessible even if the data cannot be accessible or cannot be longer available.